Hello, this is Hamparian from Washington, D.C., and the headquarters here in our nation's capital of the Armenian National Committee of America. We're joined today from Artsakh by Iskajyan, who's the director of the Armenian National Committee of Artsakh. He is from the United States, lived in California. Some ran from the fire, others ran into the fire. Kev ran into the fire, and he's been on the job every single day, advancing the Armenian cause, Artsakh's cause, from on the ground in Stepanakert. He took part earlier today in a congressional briefing. He's taken part in dozens and dozens of legislative updates, not only for legislators in the United States, but across North America, Europe, Eurasia. He is a source of information in Armenian and in English for policymakers and stakeholders around the world. He's also able to report from the ground and is able to see, I think, perhaps better than just about anybody, the impact of the blockade, which today hit its 200th day. So I'll welcome Gev and just jump right in by saying, what is the situation on the ground 200 days into Azerbaijan's blockade?
Thank you, Aram. It's always good to be on with our team in DC. So as Aram mentioned, we're entering day 200. We're past 7 months now of this blockade. And many of you have heard that our only road that connects us to Armenia and essentially the rest of the world, the road that we rely on for food, medicine, and all the basic supplies that a population needs to survive, has been cut off now for 200 days exactly. What does this mean onto the populace? I mean, every layer of society here is affected, whether you're talking about 30,000 kids that have lost access to their right to education, a basic fundamental human right, whether you're talking about the elderly population, the population that has medical needs that can't get adequate medicine, that can't get to Yerevan for treatment, whether you're talking about thousands upon thousands of people that have been laid off of their work, hundreds, if not thousands of businesses that have been closed due to this blockade. All 120,000 people here in Artsakh, in one way or another, have been affected by this blockade. And additionally, I think what's important to talk about is that this blockade is part of a confluence of efforts by Azerbaijan to exert as much pressure as they can on this population. So in addition to this blockade, they've cut off the gas. For many of those months, we were dealing with winter months. You're talking about negative Celsius, temperatures here. No gas. You're talking about your electricity being cut off. You're talking about no fuel for transportation. So everything that they can do to make it essentially impossible, unbearable to live here, Azerbaijan has been exerting that onto the populace for 200 days now.
Yeah, but I'm gonna sort of cut right to the chase on I think an issue that's on a lot of folks' minds, and that is, I'll speak about what happened here in DC last week. I'll speak about what we heard from France today, and then we'll get into this because I think I'll explain. Okay, last week there was a hearing. The first is sort of directly focused on the blockade, and it was hosted by Congressman Chris Smith. Many members of Congress participated. There were 4 leading experts, including 2 former U.S. ambassadors, and they each brought a different perspective, a different angle to the situation. But on 3 issues, they were in full agreement, in total alignment. Number 1, there should be not another dollar of U.S. military aid to Azerbaijan. Second, the people of Artsakh are facing genocide, the imminent risk of genocide. And third, that any agreement, any arrangement agreed to by any party that places Artsakh under Azerbaijan is a death sentence for the indigenous Armenian Christians of this sacred Armenian land. Let me just stress that last point. Ambassador Brownback, former governor, former senator, former ambassador for religious freedom, Ambassador John Evans, who served in Yerevan, David Phillips, and Michael Rubin, each from a different perspective, total agreement that if Artsakh is under Azerbaijan, it's a death sentence. It's an invitation. It is the recipe for genocide. So that being said, that was a very strong stand. every legislator who spoke, Congressman McGovern, Congressman Pallone, Congressman Smith, Congressman Bourakis, others who submitted testimony and weighed in different ways around the hearing, all were very much in agreement on these three core points. Earlier today, we read that the leader of France, Macron, said that in talking to Aliyev and Pashinyan, he realized that he is applying more pressure on Aliyev than Pashinyan is, right? So Pashinyan and the Pashinyan government in Yerevan seems to be the real outlier here, right? The outlier, adopting a far weaker, more appeasing, more conciliatory, more capitulating posture than the leader of France. Then certainly very important stakeholders in the US from the left and the right. All these folks understand this. We saw, we've seen statements from our church leaders, from our civic leaders, from our secular leaders across the board in the Armenian world. There's this common agreement that Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan is a recipe for genocide. And yet there's just this one voice in the Armenian world, the Pashinyan and his circle, who seem to be okay with this. And I think I think it's actually untenable. It's unsustainable. In any country, that's anywhere close to a democracy, leaders can't be that far out of sync. Is that your sense of things?
Absolutely. And I think when the conversation is centered around Artsakh, when we're talking about diplomatic meetings, whether it's in Washington, D.C., whether it's in Brussels, whether it's in Moscow or any other place in the world, yes, there is incompetency, there's lots of flaws when it comes to the Armenian government's position. But before we even get to that, I think the fundamental core of this issue is where and what is the voice of the people of Artsakh saying? When you are talking about the future of Artsakh, there is no discussion that can legitimately take place without considering the voices of the people of Artsakh, and not just the people of Artsakh, especially when these conversations are in the United States and we are the nation of liberty and democracy and self-determination, all these things that we've been founded upon as a state. When we are talking about the future of another nation, the future of another people, the people of Artsakh here have a democratically elected government. The people of Artsakh have representation. The people of Artsakh have a voice. Any conversation that does not center, if not at minimum include the people of Artsakh, is null and void. And I don't say that as like some sloganistic tagline. I say that as the basic principle. And I think that's a fair assessment. That's a fair ask to say in any negotiation process, especially one that determines the fate of 120,000 people.
Yeah, and the idea that negotiations about a people should take place with those people is like, it's a common sense, but it's also international law. We saw Secretary Blinken made a big point about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, a principle that should be universalized to nothing about Artsakh without Artsakh. And I think that the discussion changes from where Pashinyan has positioned it. His narrative is something like, if only we surrender just a little bit more land, we will get some peace. He's kind of got this transactional view of how the surrender, the sacrifice of Artsakh is somehow going to either save him politically or save Armenia. I think the folks in Artsakh, and I think most Armenians, I think certainly the Armenians in Sunik and anybody within sniper range of the border knows that this is not a transactional arrangement. This is not about giving Azerbaijan more land. Hell, if land were the currency that contributed to Armenian peace, perhaps the loss of Sepastya and Van and Dikranagerd and Kars and Ardahan, Nakhichevan, 3/4 of Artsakh. If land for peace worked, well, Armenia would be the most peaceful place on earth. Of course, it's not. The loss of land has only emboldened Azerbaijan. So the Pashinyan government still seems to be sticking to this very flawed transactional model, land for peace model. I think most 8th graders, 9th graders would know that's foolish. And the people of Artsakh understand it's actually an existential situation that they took Hadrut and then they came for Shush, for Stepanakert, and when they don't want Stepanakert, they'll come for Sunik and then Karakunik and then Sevan and the rest. And that, I think, is that fundamental common sense seems to be, I think, pretty deeply rooted across the Armenian nation. with a few exceptions. And unfortunately, those exceptions set a bit of a ceiling on what Armenians around the rest of the world can do. We knock on doors all the time in Washington, and one of the first questions we get is, well, you're talking about saving Artsakh. We hear from the folks in Yerevan that they're fine with surrendering Artsakh, and we're like, well, you know what? Their arms are being twisted. They're undertaking a foolish path that we hope they understand is wrong, and that we know for sure is wrong. And if you're going to be listening to Armenians, listen to the Armenians who hold U.S. citizenship, who vote in your elections, who take part in your democracy. I think that's very, very essential voice that we need to raise. This is one of those times where we need to follow our moral compass and our basic self-defense instincts as a nation, that the surrender of Artsakh can lead to nothing good. It will simply embolden an enemy that will then advance further and further and further. We know that to be true. I think everyone on this, within earshot of us, knows that to be true. And we just need to keep working and working and working, building political capital, moving leaders around the world into the right position, and eventually moving Yerevan off of this path of surrender.
And, I think you made a good point in when you said that when we speak to these legislators, when we speak to representatives of the State Department, and they say, well, the folks in Yerevan are saying, well, there are folks in Stepanakert as well. And I believe that they have a voice in this process. And, secondly, when we do hear those narratives come from the United States, when we hear those narratives come from Europe or other parts of the world, we have to demand an end to selective diplomacy on behalf of the United States. So when we see in different places around the world, in one condition or another, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's conversations around Taiwan right now, whether it's conversations around Kosovo, all of these things hinge on the people's right to freedom, the people's ability to have a democratic government, the people's ability to live in safety, in peace, to have their human rights guaranteed. The United States' ability to send humanitarian aid to certain places around the world. Why, we must ask, do those conditions not apply to Artsakh? We're not asking for anything special. We're not asking for anything extra. We're asking for the same type of diplomacy that the United States purports to, expound here in Stepanakert, here in Artsakh.
I can't agree more. And the corollary to that, the principle you just articulated, is that the more sunshine, the better. These are we're in very much in alignment with the American historical tradition, our ethical tradition, our moral tradition, all of that. We're right down the pike: self-determination, consent of the governed. Read the Declaration, read the Constitution, read the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln's second inaugural, all the way through Kennedy's inaugural. We fit right into that. The idea of freedom, liberty, self-determination. Hell, we fought the entire Cold War for the liberation of free people from foreign rule. And so we're on the right side of the issue. The negative here is that there are interests aligned against us, not principles really aligned against us, but interests aligned against us. And what they want to do is arm twist Yerevan. They want to ignore Artsakh. They want to embolden Azerbaijan. They want to do all these things, but these things are out of sync with our values. So they're all done in the shadows, behind closed doors, with the curtain drawn. And we want to draw these discussions out into the open. So the question might be asked, what rights should all people enjoy to self-determination, including the people of Artsakh, hell, including the people of Ukraine, including the people of Taiwan, elsewhere in the world. What rights might or should these people enjoy? And the answer is, well, they should enjoy full rights. Then how can you square that with placing a free people under a foreign dictatorship? And they can't. Let's face it. Anthony Blinken was, helping to host talks this past week, and he's doing so in the full knowledge that if this goes through, he'll have a signing ceremony. He'll check a box. Maybe he'll be able to point to a Biden-Harris, diplomatic victory. I put that in quotes, victory. But he does that with the knowledge that this is a death sentence for the people of Artsakh. And we have to draw that out into the open and have him answer for them. He needs to answer to our community, to our coalition partners, to certainly our congressional friends on that score. We were very encouraged, Kev, by the hearing that took place last week with the experts. Chairman Smith, Chris Smith of New Jersey, announced that he'll hold a second hearing, and this time he'll invite people from the administration, and we're really looking forward to that. In the past, let's say 2 years, we've seen a lot of hearings where members are given 2 or 3 minutes to ask all their questions, and they're able to sneak in 1 or 2 questions, let's say to a Tony Blinken or a Samantha Power, and they use their, the limited time, and they know how to game the clock, and they offer some they punt it and say, I'll get back to you, and they never do, or they offer some evasive responsive questions. This will be a hearing chaired by the dogged and determined Chris Smith of New Jersey. There was a counterpart to this when Senator Menendez did a hearing with Assistant Secretary Donfried and Ambassador Rieker. These are those opportunities to really, really ask tough questions. I'll just take one sort of detour here to questions and answers when we think about the hearing that will take place later. It'll actually take place in mid-July. Earlier today, we saw the U.S. State Department spokesperson asked, and we'll dig into the aid issue much more, but really a telling question today. He was asked a very straightforward question. There is a desperate lack of food and energy and electricity in Nagorno-Karabakh. Will the U.S. be responsive to requests to help meet those energy and food needs in Artsakh? And it's sort of like the dog that didn't bark, right? The answer that you should have heard, right, was, well, of course. There's nowhere in the world that people are starving. There's nowhere in the world people are in need of medicine or housing or energy that we abandon, right? We have a needs-based approach to assistance. Where there is a need, where there is a crisis, and we can talk about that word, where there is a crisis, our government steps up. We don't litmus test it based on, well, you're this ethnicity or this religion or this background or politics or this or that. No, if there are people in need, we make every effort to help them. We've airlifted assistance into some of the most challenging environments in the world. But the State Department spokesman today just punted, dodged it and said, well, I'm not going to give you an answer to that question. That really is a very telling non-answer. And it really speaks volumes to how the withholding of aid is actually an act of complicity in Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing. It's not logistics, oh, we just can't get it done. It's not indifference. It's not even incompetence. It is active complicity in an effort by Azerbaijan, as you said, to make Artsakh unlivable. And this is unforgivable. Absolutely unforgivable.
I think, and I think this is a good time to recant. I've had conversations with folks like the Deputy Secretary of State, Olson, on this issue specifically. And this goes back to, again, selective diplomacy and changing the goalposts when it comes to Artsakh. So our conversation, let's say 2.5, 3 months ago was, what is the situation in Artsakh? And their response was, we understand that it's tough. We understand that there's a humanitarian situation going on and so forth. However, there are still Red Cross trucks moving through. There's still some supplies being brought in by Russian peacekeepers. Well, since the 15th of this month, if the original goalpost wasn't enough, if they weren't going to look at us from the same metric that they assess any other humanitarian crisis, fine, we get the short end of that stick. But to their own words, let's hold them accountable. If they were leaning on the fact that, well, maybe some humanitarian aid is coming through this outlet, through this organization, now none of that is coming through. And we have to ask the State Department, we have to ask USAID, why not? In lieu of everything that's happened, if not for the last 7 months, for at least the last 2 weeks, hasn't there been an announcement on this issue?
Yes, I can't agree more, Gav. They don't have reasons, they just have excuses. And if as the rationale grows stronger and stronger, their excuses become, frankly, more transparently ridiculous. The test, we understand in meeting with USAID's Humanitarian Bureau and the Ledge Bureau and their Europe-Eurasia department was something like it hasn't met the level of crisis, and they have a certain way to define crisis. A cursory look, just do a search on the USAID website. The word crisis is used over 50,000 times. The crisis is not something that USAID refrains from designating situations. They're very quick to call things crises, and they're very quick to respond to those crises. And that's to the credit of USAID. And yet they have this exception, this remarkably, this outlier of an exception, which is, if everywhere else in the world will meet humanitarian needs, we'll fly stuff in, we'll do whatever we have to do to help those in need, with the exception of Artsakh. And, reading between the lines, and I don't think this is a stretch in any sense, reading between the lines, what they're saying, actually what they're communicating, not what they're saying. What they're communicating is something like, if you're hungry, maybe that's a good thing. If your children are sick and have no medicine, if your elderly are ill and there's no one to care for them, well, maybe that will motivate you a little bit more to make the concessions that you need to be making to satisfy this oil-rich dictatorship, which is serving some geopolitical purpose for us. So they're taking a humanitarian need and the love of parents for their children, the love of children for their own grandparents, that intergenerational bonds that tie the Armenians of Artsakh together so closely, and turning that, weaponizing that against the people of Artsakh, and using the prospect of starvation as a political tool. And that is, it's, as I said, it's unforgivable, yet it's also absolutely unmistakable. If it was, if they had provided aid prior to the blockade and then ceased it during the blockade, you might give them a little bit of slack and say, well,
and I think it's important to add that what they do in this process is they turn the so-called negotiation process, these so-called talks, into a hostage situation, where the people at stake are the folks here. And when you mentioned, how do we define a crisis? In Artsakh, we can define it in so many different ways that there is no excuse. If you're talking about a food shortage, we can talk about a crisis in that aspect. If you're talking about the lack of water, the lack of electricity, that's a crisis in itself. If you're talking about 30,000 kids that can't get to school, that's the right to education being denied, that's a crisis in itself. If you're talking about people without access to medical care, that's a crisis in itself. So every category that we can imagine, every layer of society that we can think of that can possibly be affected, all of those conditions would apply to the folks in Artsakh. And unfortunately, as you said, and I think this not only does it make this a fraudulent process, but it delegitimizes these talks. If these talks are being done, let's say, quote unquote, metaphorically, at gunpoint, and that gun is pointed at the people of Artsakh, and simultaneously they also have no voice in this process. They're only used as hostages. There's something inherently wrong with all of this, and not only is it wrong from the moral standing, but that is not a lasting peace. If they want to call this a peace agreement, any peace agreement that does not value the voices of the people it affects, and any peace agreement that takes away the dignity of the people that they're talking about, there can be no peace in those conditions.
Yeah, it is cruel. The murder of 4 Armenians in Artsakh during the peace talks, and the fact that in no way derailed the peace talks, in fact, I think was viewed certainly by Baku, but also by folks in Washington, and in some twisted sense, even Yerevan, as some kind of further incentive to secure further advantages, or further concessions rather, from Artsakh, right, from the Armenian side. And Yerevan all too willing to make those concessions, Baku all too eager to force those concessions, and Washington just pushing to shepherd that through. Those kinds of attacks, frankly, are not problems as they should be, but rather seen as opportunities. And again, that's like really weaponizing the lives of the people of Artsakh, the love that they have for one another. It really is not a peace process at all. It's a process of forced concessions, which brings me to a topic, and there's a lot of other stuff I want to go over, especially about aid to Azerbaijan, but I'm going to just go right for the raw nerve here, Gev. As bad as the Pashinyan government has been, they use absolutely none of the leverage at their disposal. They actually do their best to eliminate those aspects of leverage that the Armenian nation brings to bear on the world stage. Strangely enough, triangulating in this sense with Azerbaijan against global voices that are pro-Artsakh, right? Which is where have we reached as a nation? Yet Yerevan has not gone, I think, as far as Pashinyan would like. And I think we can look at that and say, well, certainly that's a good thing, because the concessions he's making are reckless and will lead to the loss of not just of Artsakh, but very likely Armenia as well. And the question is, what is constraining him? There's one school of thought that's kind of a bit fatalist that says nothing can constrain that guy. He's just has his head set on, he's going to win a Nobel Prize by giving away Armenian land, as if that's a heroic act. But there's this folks who say like, well, no, he's just undeterrable. The fact of the matter is he has been deterred, and he has been kept from doing the worst, I think, by the best of our nation. The fact that Armenians around the world continue to raise our voices, to generate political capital. I was blessed yesterday to join with young Armenians at the Azerbaijani embassy. We marched down to our Armenian embassy and raised our voices against the surrender of Artsakh, and that takes place in capital after capital, country after country. So I think that,
and we can directly correlate that capital to ANC offices around the world, high-taught offices around the world that are serving in the most crucial of times as the foreign ministry of the Armenian nation, of the interests of the collective Armenian nation. When we're talking about the United States, we're talking about the absence of voices from Artsakh, right? United States, the ANC is organizing talks with congressional offices, with our offices in Artsakh, but also various folks that, like former state ministers, like human rights ombudsman. When you're talking about in places like France, you're talking about ANC representatives meeting directly with the president, and the president himself verbatim saying, "I'm with you guys. These are my positions on Artsakh. I am stronger on this than your prime minister itself." I think that these deterrents that we're talking about are the accumulation of work, of collectives, of grassroots collectives throughout the world that today, unfortunately, when we should be working together, when we should be making each other stronger and supplementing ourselves, we have to act, unfortunately, at times as a deterrent to the Armenian prime minister's quote unquote diplomacy. And we have to fight for the vested interests of the Armenian nation. It is what it is, but it is happening daily.
I can't agree more. There's a temptation that's our work, and we'll do it gladly. And if it's difficult work, we all feel like, well, I'm glad we have the wherewithal, that we have the health and well-being to be able to carry this fight at such a crucial moment. We actually feel fortunate that it's us, that we have the opportunity to serve even during these most difficult times. The Armenian world has no shortage of folks who like to posture as experts, and surrender can be made to look sophisticated, but surrender is surrender. And the fact of the matter is, I know that you could travel the four corners of Artsakh, village to village, town to town, and they would understand that in their bones, and that the currency of Armenian survival over millennia has been service and sacrifice. That's, I think, understood in vast reaches of Armenia, absent a couple of corners of Yerevan, certainly around our diaspora. That surrender cannot lead us to survival. That appeasement is just a slippery slope that you give A and they come for B and they go for C. We've seen it time and time again. When has Azerbaijan, been satisfied by any concession that they've secured? It just leads to the next one, the next one, the next one. And when Aliyev talks about Yerevan as an Azerbaijani city, which he will soon reclaim, like, take the guy at his word. He's not misled us with his threats. So yeah, this is where we are today. It's not where any of us would like to be, but the idea that we owe anybody our conscience, our common sense is false. We owe our nation, we owe our past, we owe our future, our best efforts aligned with the survival of our people. So let me jump into the military aid to Azerbaijan. Every dollar that gets sent there in one way or another strengthens the Azerbaijani military. There's talk about how it's sort of Iran facing, or that it's Caspian Sea, Caspian Guard directed. But these are dollars that strengthen the Azerbaijani military, that train up their soldiers. And we know that those soldiers who were trained up using that assistance ended up being deployed against Artsakh. And even if those soldiers weren't deployed in every instance, it freed up money that Azerbaijan was able to deploy against Artsakh and also Armenia. Knowing that, we have placed at the very top of our list ending U.S. military assistance to Azerbaijan. We're trying to skin that cat a dozen different ways. There's statutory prohibitions. There are amendments to the Foreign Aid Bill, amendments to the Defense Authorization Act. There's the president himself. The president has waived this twice. The last time he did so was about a year ago. So we're right now in that window when we could hear at any moment the president has made a decision in this regard. So it could be that he'll waive this law tomorrow, and that a new year of assistance will flow to Baku. This, we find deeply offensive. It's not as though, depriving Azerbaijan of $1 or $1 million or $10 million is going to starve the Azeri military of the means to attack Armenians. It won't. But it will send a message to Azerbaijan that what they're doing is not business as usual. And the fact of the matter is that until this very moment, nothing the U.S. government has done has sent a signal to Azerbaijan to stop.
Absolutely. And when we talk about, and this is a question that's often asked on calls that you and I are on with congressional offices, with Senate offices, what do you guys want us to do? And then at times they'll bring up, well, the State Department put out a statement saying that the Lachin corridor should be open. This congressional panel said this, and this Senate hearing, stated this. That's a good start. I'm not dismissing the value of those words. They have a certain value, but nothing is as good a measure as punitive measures. And I think, look, here I often get asked, they're like, you are someone that's from the United States, and when you're on these calls with congressional offices and stuff, you guys, I don't know if harsh tone is the word, but we're always demanding accountability. And they say, what about this country? What about Russia? What about blah blah blah? Everybody in this mess, I'm sure, has a certain place where they need to be held accountable. But I try to break it down to them in this sense. I'm like, are you upset at the fact that Azerbaijan buys Russian weapons? They're like, yes, absolutely. That's wrong. I'm like, absolutely. So imagine somebody cut them $100 million check, not even to buy their own weapons, but to fund their military. How would you feel about that? They're like, well, that's absolutely unacceptable. I'm like, that's what we're fighting against today. And yes, maybe Azerbaijan can find that 100 million somewhere else, but one, that's not a drop in the bucket. That is a serious amount of funds. And two, it not only does it deprive them of that funding, but it doesn't give them carte blanche the ability to do whatever they want. Because when they move forward with these aggressive actions, when they move forward with, suppressing our human rights, when they have all these attacks, not only does that money fund those weapons, but that money is a check, is a statement, is the loudest statement to them saying this is okay.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, something needs to be taken away. A punitive measure has to be enforced, or we are not only complicit, we are condoning these actions.
And I would say that for folks who try to compare, well, here's what America is doing, here's what others are doing, we don't need to benchmark America.
We're U.S. citizens. This is our agency in our nation.
That's right. This is our
that we love, but yeah.
And I tell the kids I teach at Sunday school that we are hosts, not guests in this house. So we don't need to compare ourselves to any other country. We need to compare our actions against our ideals, That's the only measure that matters. Is America living up to its ideals? Are we able to raise our voices in a democratic system to put America on the right side of these issues? Very, very, very important. We're not here to do anything else. And the military aid, it's like a vote. It's a vote in favor of Aliyev's ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. The State Department sends people to talk to us, and they say things like, rest assured that we are obeying every letter of the law. Okay, let's dig in there, dive in. Senator Menendez commissioned a report. It took about 1.5 years to prepare. It's about 60 pages long. And that report by an independent watchdog arm of the US government found that the US is not obeying the law and not reporting on how the military aid upsets the military balance, how it is used against Armenians, and how it upsets the peace process, right? So we know that the law wasn't adhered to, but let's assume, let's cede that point just for the sake of argument. What message does it send? What message are we sending to Baku when we greenlight continued military assistance? This is not humanitarian aid. We're not feeding children or providing, medicine. This is military assistance to a belligerent nation, to a nation that, as recently as this week, killed 4 Armenians. There's no excuse for this, and that's why it's at the very top of our agenda. This coming, the Congress will go out of session at the end of this week. When they return, they will take up the consideration of the National Defense Authorization Act. That is a focus of considerable attention on our part. We're working to ensure that that large law, it's a very large law, includes provisions that constrain Azerbaijan, that hold Baku accountable. Separately, we're working on the assistance to Artsakh. The absence of that assistance is inexcusable and highly.
And I think it's really important on this note that you made, that you said, let's go deep into it. Let's logically play this out. When we talk to folks in the United States, in the State Department, and we say, okay, why are we giving Azerbaijan this $100 million? They're like, well, it's as a deterrent to Iran. Okay, why do we want to be a deterrent to Iran? Why do we want to make sure that, we have something in place against Iran? Well, they abuse human rights. Well, they're a threat in the region. Well, this. So if we logically play that out, all of those things that we're accusing Iran of doing, Azerbaijan is doing that and much worse to the populace of Artsakh. And that needs to be logically played out and explained. To deter Iran, we are funding another dictator. That does not sound like a solution. That sounds like gasoline on a fire.
Absolutely. And okay, let's laundry list the actual violations, and each of which has been addressed through legislation, and the Congress has pushed it so far, but in order to really sort of get traction, the administration's got to pick up that trail. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here. We're talking about the use of prohibited munitions, documented use of white phosphorus, and cluster bombs, including against civilians, the cluster bombs against civilians in Stepanakert, and the white phosphorus against some of the more forested areas. That's one. The recruitment through Turkey of mercenaries from Syria. It's number 2. There's an international convention against the use of foreign mercenaries. Foreign terrorist fighters are called. The detention, illegal detention of prisoners of war. Far worse even than that is the execution of bound and unarmed Armenian prisoners using rifles. And then the posting of trophy videos of those executions as some kind of, points of pride by the Azerbaijani military. You add to that the presence of U.S. parts in the Turkish drones, the Bayraktar drones used by Azerbaijan against Artsakh, and this instance after instance after instance like this. And so these are the types of things that we point the finger at other countries. So the countries that are on the list of countries that get sanctions have, they're roughly where Azerbaijan is on executing people, on illegal use of weapons, mercenaries, things of that sort, yet total free pass for Azerbaijan. To the extent that the US government, our US government, the Department of Commerce, chaired by former Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo, the Department of Commerce, she's the secretary, they are apparently currently entertaining a proposal to sell rifles, to sell US rifles to Azerbaijan. We've met with them, members of Congress, Senator Menendez, Congressman Adam Schiff, and others have weighed in, I hope decisively, but to deter what should have been a no-brainer. The second that proposal went in to sell rifles to Azerbaijan, the US government should have announced, we're not selling any weapons to Azerbaijan.
And this goes into full circle back to the beginning of our discussion of selective diplomacy. If sanctions are going to be put on certain nations for certain reasons, we're not asking the US government to change its policies. We're not asking the US government to do anything revolutionary, to do anything drastic. We're asking them to enforce the same policies that they have in different places in different continents throughout the world here in Artsakh. We're asking them to stay true to their own purported principles and diplomatic stances. That's all we're asking them to do.
I'll tell you a story. Ambassador Rieker held the position of negotiator. It got kind of redefined, not quite as the Minsk group negotiator, but the U.S. like regional conflicts coordinator, or whatever, some title that includes some, permutation of those words, right? So he was there. He appeared at a hearing with Senator Menendez hosted, and then along with Karen Donfried. I'm not saying this is causation here, but they both left the State Department within a few weeks of that hearing. They certainly were very uncomfortable at that hearing. Why they left the department, I have no idea. Somebody can ask them one day. But that Ambassador Rieker held that position. He left and then was replaced by Louis Bono. Rieker was at least at the level of ambassador. Louis Bono, I think, is lower than level of ambassador. We've always felt that position should be held by a U.S. ambassador. The French have always elected an ambassador. The Russians have always elected an ambassador. Nonetheless, so Louis Bono, we had the opportunity to meet with him, and without going into the exact back and forth of our discussions, we left the conversation feeling as though he said, he communicated essentially, look at my actions, see what I do, right? I'm new on the job, see what I do. Okay. First thing he did was to travel to the region and state publicly that even the possibility of sanctions against Azerbaijan are off the table. They are not even remotely under consideration. So like negotiation 101, this is what maybe, I think, again, like most children would know, that you don't cede your leverage in the first minute of your negotiation. He just said, no, we're nothing, Azerbaijan will bear no consequence for its action, that they will get a free pass here in Washington. And then he said about his, I guess, mediation, having lost all of his leverage in the first moment. It was very unwise. One way to think about it, I guess, is it's unwise, right? That's not a good way to achieve a durable democratic peace. But maybe it was wise if the goal here is to empower Azerbaijan, if the goal here is to be complicit in their ethnic cleansing of Artsakh to solve some geopolitical equation on the part of US policymakers. Maybe it was the wise move in a very twisted way, but that gives you an example of that double standard, that we're quick to pull out the sanction card against every manner of country that crosses the US, and yet the exact opposite with Azerbaijan, where our lead diplomat takes sanctions off the table at the very outset of his mission. And that just tells you, maybe that tells you everything you need to know and how very, very bad this policy is. I'll take a little bit of a tangent here, Kev, but there was some talk recently about Julian Assange and whether he would be extradited and this and that. And everyone's got an opinion about Assange. But I will tell you this, that some of the dirtiest, darkest aspects of US complicity in Turkey's denials were revealed by WikiLeaks. And I consider that a public service. I think as a people, we're better off knowing when our government is covering up genocide. I think it's something our government shouldn't do. And if they are doing it, they shouldn't be able to do it in secret. And if they are doing it in secret, it should be revealed and they should feel bad about it. That's a healthy thing, right? If something's wrong, it should be revealed. And he helped reveal some of that. There are many other ways that was revealed. And ultimately, enough sunshine got into those dark places that the windows were burst open and the truth prevailed. I'm convinced that the same exact thing is true today on relating to Artsakh. Probably the most twisted thing I saw through WikiLeaks, Kev, was the former Deputy Secretary of State, Stroll Talbot, twisting the arm of the Armenian government to stop global recognition of the Armenian genocide. If you can imagine, right? If you wonder, what's my government capable of, right? Well, I don't know what our government or our nation is capable of. I'll tell you what some of our diplomats are capable of. They're capable of going to a blockaded, landlocked, genocide survivor state, still struggling to survive 100 years out from a horrific crime that wiped it off of 9/10 of its homeland, killed 2 out of every 3 people, vast demographic, economic, geographic, agricultural consequences, struggling to survive, and going to them and then twisting their arm and saying, this happened to you and you're going to shut up about it and do what we say.
And equally dangerous, unfortunately, we have folks that are willing to play ball with them.
Yeah. Oh, and
when
so
those requests come through.
Yeah, and so that same sort of depravity is being mirrored right now on the Artsakh side in terms of Artsakh policy. The shutters have yet to be opened, the curtains have yet to be drawn, but they will be, and we'll see. We know the games that are being played, and we're fighting, very hard. As I said, trying to get some light into these dark places. U.S. policy on Artsakh today is in a dark place, and our job is to shine light upon it. We talked about the war crimes, right? And how we need to hold Azerbaijan accountable. We talked about the delivering assistance to Artsakh. That's another sort of main pillar of our advocacy, and then certainly cutting the military aid to Azerbaijan. These efforts that are taking place here, as you know very well, are reflected in Canada, in South America, across Asia, certainly Australia, Europe, France, Belgium, United Kingdom, elsewhere. Each of us bringing our piece, bringing our contribution to the effort. And we are, you mentioned the foreign ministry for the nation, that we certainly are. The nation is a very, very broad concept. It, in many ways, is a larger concept than government, even possibly state. There is an Armenian spirit, and I think that each of us are owners of a piece of that. And I think collectively, when we work together, we align our activities with sort of that shared vision of where our nation needs to head and what's needed for survival. So that's like a second army, a foreign ministry for the nation. I think this is much needed today for folks who think that Yerevan's got it all covered. I don't think anyone agrees with that. I'm sure in their more truthful moments, even the Pashinyans and Mirzoyans of the world understand that they don't have what it takes to accurately, aggressively, assertively, stand up for our nation. They would be wiser to look to their natural allies around the world and the leverage that we bring to the equation and spend a little less time allying with some of the worst enemies of our nation to try to silence our voices. So this is where we are. As I said, again, let me turn for a second to I'll sort of put you on the spot a little bit here. As I said at the outset, some run from the fire. You ran into the fire. What was it? What was it? What was it in your life, in your childhood? Who were the people that meant a lot to you growing up? Your family, your community, your church, let's say, your school experience. What were the steps that led to us today talking to get Iskajyan to Stepanakert Artsakh?
I think one, I would say it's a testament to the fact that I'm a product of my community, and that community has so many layers. You talk about family, you talk about our local churches, wherever they may be. You talk about our sister organizations. I came up through the AYF. I was a volunteer for the ANCA and, various positions and so forth. So I've been molded by this community, and not just molded, I've been given so much by this community in terms of my sense of identity, who I am in this world. Many of my skill sets were honed and cultivated through organizations like the ANCA. So when it comes to times like these, they say, may you live in interesting times. I think we're living in very interesting times. Unfortunately, they're very tough sometimes, especially right now for the Armenian nation. All of those things that were given to me, being a product of this community in a time like this, it was time for me to ask, what can I give back? And I don't think that I'm necessarily, even now, giving anything back. I think I get more by being here in Artsakh than anything that I can do. And I say that both proudly and in one way as a stark reminder to folks listening. I don't want to be the last diasporan here in Artsakh. And I don't say this to be, dramatic or whatever. I'm here every day. I've been here for over a year. There is a real possibility that we may lose this place. And if our attitude towards Artsakh, if our attitudes towards this process in these next few months, in these next few years is apathy, I will guarantee that we will lose it. So I see my role here being a conduit to help folks around the world, folks that are incredibly committed, Armenians, diasporans, to do what they can to connect them with Artsakh and to get that collective synergy and to direct it towards this place. I look towards right now to the left of me, I can see the hills of Shushi. And if, 10, 20 years ago, someone were to ask me, what would you do? To ask any of us, what would we do to get Ani and Van and Western Armenia back? We would say anything, right? We would do anything to do that. Today, we're living that reality where erasure, ethnic cleansing, Armenians being wiped from their land is a incredibly real reality. I'm not one of those that say all will be well. I think things will be well if we work for it, if we organize for it, if we put in the blood, sweat, and tears for it, but only through that. So I think that our role as a collective diaspora through these next few months, through these next few years, has to be all eyes on Artsakh. We cannot let, Stepanakert, Martakert, and Marduni go the way of Ani, Van, and Artsakh. And that isn't just historical, it's also personal. There will be a time where our kids and our grandkids will ask what happened during these times, and then we will explain it. Then they will turn and ask, what did we do during these times? And I hope our answer is everything. And that can only be done with our collective strength. As I look, you guys in DC, day and night, are working towards this. Our friends in Australia, our ANCA chapters in Brussels, in Argentina, in France, everywhere else throughout the world are grinding their gears for this. And that is the only way. And when we talk about deterrence, I think in all of these difficulties and all these tough times, we have to also realize that Artsakh would have been given away much sooner if not for those efforts, and we have to keep it up.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Gav, by saying that the traditional model, certainly the Armenian National Committee model around the world, is to aggregate our capital, our voices, and then direct them toward policymakers. So the Congress, the President in the United States, and the various leaders around the world. That's that's our bread and butter, right? Today, though, we need both an outward message, which is support Artsakh, do not surrender Artsakh. Forcing Artsakh under Azerbaijan is death sentence. That's our external message. The internal message, and the internal message is to the guys occupying the various seats of power in Yerevan: stop what you're doing. Do not surrender Artsakh. And that is absolutely essential. Now, there might be folks out there who are reluctant to do that, right? They might say, well, is that really appropriate? Well, let's really test that proposition and really examine it very closely. What exactly is it that we owe our nation? What is it we owe those who came before us, some who we knew, others generations prior that we did not know? Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, those who endured the genocide, and others. What do we owe the future, the generations yet unborn, right? Do we owe them silence or acquiescence or obedience to a particular political leader, to a particular politician, right? That's one way to think about it. Well, this person, I should agree with this person because I should agree with this person because they hold they sit in some chair. Okay, well, let's think about that in an American context. We're in a divisive period in the United States, but we're not in a situation in America that's an existential threat to the very existence of America. And yet there are a lot of Americans who would say, just because President Trump was elected doesn't mean I have to agree with everything President Trump does. In fact, part of being a good American is disagreeing with President Trump. Or, I don't owe my allegiance to President Biden. I need not advance his policies. In fact, being a good American may involve opposing President Biden, right? Those are things that we understand very readily as Americans, that we don't owe our allegiance to a politician, left or right, Democrat or Republican. We owe our allegiance to our sense of the Armenian nation, to our constitution, to our laws. Like that's our allegiance is aligned with something higher than this or that politician. I think it would be pretty pathetic model of citizenship to be based upon love of a politician. There's not a single politician who's ever been born who deserves our loyalty. Our loyalty is to our nation and in the US context, to our constitution. So I would apply that same logic, that same thinking to Armenia. Do we owe Nikol Pashinyan our silence, our obedience, or do we need we follow his policies, even when every instinct, every strand of Armenian DNA in our being tells us this is ruin, this is reckless.
If I'm on that point, I think what's really important is at times when, whether it's the US government or some apologists for Pashinyan, when they say, well, they are the government of Armenia, they have the right to negotiate, to dictate what happens in the future. I say no to that. I say that we do not have the right to negotiate a way to dictate the sacrifice of generations before us, and we do not have the right to give away the inheritance of the generations that may come after us. We are looking, if that is how we perceive this entire process, the process of the future of Artsakh being negotiated, that's incredibly myopic. We have a duty to those that came before us, and we have an incredibly important duty for those that will come after us. And that is for no government to dictate.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I think that we need to raise that voice and send that message very clearly in every way we can. The easiest way is on social media. So take your whatever accounts you're on, your Instagram account, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, TikTok or whatever, and simply repeat, say rather, what's in your heart. You don't need me to script it for you. You know what's in your heart. And it speaks to the fact that Artsakh must remain Armenian. Any surrender of Artsakh is a death sentence. It's a death sentence. A child could tell you that.
Yeah. And look, we don't have the billions that Turkey and Azerbaijan does to spend on buying foreign journalists. We don't have the roads to bring journalists into Artsakh even. What we have is our collective strength. What we have is our voice. And fortunately, in this day and age, we can amplify that voice through social media, through getting in contact with ANCA's action alerts. There are ways that we can fight back. Maybe not like our enemies, maybe not like our adversaries, but we have collective strength within ourselves. And I think that the bare minimum we can do is start there.
That's right. And for those who are a bit cynical about this, who say that nothing we can do can deter Pashinyan from the surrender of Artsakh, I would say, well, if there was nothing we could do to deter it, then why hasn't he done it already? And the fact of the matter is he knows that there's a lot of opposition. A lot of that opposition is domestic. Certainly uniformly in Artsakh, very predominantly and very heavy in itself across our diaspora. We saw recently that our church leaders, apostolic, diocese, prelacy, evangelical, Catholic, wrote a very strong letter to President Biden, saying any surrender of Artsakh is a death sentence. We saw the AGBU put out a very strong statement about self-determination and how any Azerbaijani status under Artsakh status under Azerbaijan will lead to a second genocide. We've seen the Knights of Vartan. We have seen every spiritual institution in our world, every civic institution in our world, every secular institution across the board that's brought consensus. And we just need to sort of make that drumbeat grow louder and louder and louder. And that Armenian voice will be the one that prevails. It is frankly the true Armenian voice. Take a poll, ask your friends, just type out a question on Facebook. What do you think about the surrender of Artsakh? How do you think that'll turn?
Yeah. And in fact, they did that poll in Armenia itself. When we say, when we talk about the Armenian government, well over 90 some odd % of the population in Armenia said that Artsakh under Azerbaijan is absolutely unacceptable. So whether we're talking about the diaspora, whether we're talking about organizations, religious, cultural, political, whether we're talking about the people of Artsakh, whether we're talking about the people of Armenia, there is no issue in the Armenian global world where people are more united, I would say.
Yeah, the way to test this is just in a quiet moment, maybe early in the morning, maybe late at night, ask yourself a question about Artsakh, right? And you'll answer it, and the answer will literally come from thousands of years of history. It'll be, you'll answer it as an individual, but you'll be channeling our spirit as a nation, and it'll be the right thing. And there's not a single Armenian I know, and I know a lot of Armenians. I know, Geb, you know a lot of Armenians. Nobody is on the side of surrendering Artsakh, and nobody thinks that's good. Hell, Macron, the leader of France, held that position and was frustrated that he had a more pro-Artsakh position than even the guy holding the prime minister position in Yerevan. We're on the right side of this issue. We just have to execute very effectively, very assertively. We need to do that externally, right, in talking to policymakers and other stakeholders, and then internally by constraining the reckless decisions that can be made in Yerevan on behalf of the people of Artsakh that would lead to their ruin. So this is, I think, a message I think we definitely want to send. Kev, I know we're coming upon the hour mark. Are there thoughts that you'd like to share, points we haven't covered yet that you'd like to touch on before we close?
Look, I would say that if there are folks that are apathetic towards this process of fighting for Artsakh, and not because they have any ill intent, but because some of them believe that nothing may come out of it, right? And I would say that if the world powers do nothing, we will lose everything. But if we don't do everything, they will do nothing. So we have to try. We have to make an effort towards this. Our only failure will be in apathy. And I do believe, as we've talked about, as we've brought up these like countless examples, that power, that grassroots ability to not just reverse this process, but to restore our rights, I think it's there. And I think that we have to galvanize everybody moving into the future around Artsakh. This is not just about Artsakh, it's about who we are as a diaspora, who we are as a people, who we will be as a people into the future. There's so many things that will be dictated on what happens here in Artsakh, even issues of our own personal identity and how we view ourselves will be mirrored through what happens here in Artsakh and what happens globally around this issue.
Amen. Amen. Good. Amen.
Good to be on, Aram. And thank you all in Washington, D.C. for all the work you guys do, for the countless meetings with the congressional Senate reps, for bringing voices from Artsakh, not just mine, but so many other voices that through these last few years, through these last few months, through the most harrowing of times, have been silenced, unfortunately, by some of our own, and also by powers much larger than us. Thank you for always amplifying those voices, because that is the way.
Thank you, Gab. Thank you for being with us today. And we will be back soon with another program dealing with Artsakh and making sure that our community is heard